Hey guys, my guest tonight, A.W. Finnegan, believes that the U.S. government may have been trying to turn Lyme disease into a biological weapon. We'll be right back. Grab your popcorn and snacks, find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust, turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Hey everybody, sorry for the delay. Sorry for the delay. There were some technical difficulties. I apologize. Welcome to the show. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour or so. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team based out of Sacramento, California. We are 45 strong up and down the state, so that means if you think you have a paranormal need, we can help you out with that. But the state's a big state. Just a quick warning, and it may take us a couple days to get to you. Like I said, we do have people up and down the state, but there's a lot of lowlands and flatlands and deserts and things in the state, so it might take us a while to get to you. But in that case, we do have psychics on staff who can phone you and talk to you about what may or not be going on. And in the cases where there is something going on, they can calm the energy, calm whatever's going on down until we get out there. So that gives us some time, okay? All right, that being said, you can find us all over the web. Just Google California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team or Google California Haunts California Haunts Radio, and you'll find us. That is leading to this. If you're watching from Facebook, and a lot of you are tonight, and you see and like what you hear, please feel free to follow if you haven't done so already. And also, give us some likes. Show us thumbs up, happy faces, that sort of thing. And do comment in the chat room. Because what that does is it puts us up higher, what Facebook calls, or what the internet calls the FYP. And it alerts the master computer to share us out to more people. So if you do that, I'd really appreciate it. I almost forgot to push my little button here. Hang on, let me push this button. Boom. Okay. And if that works the same all the way across. For instance, for YouTube, same thing. Chat, give us happy faces, likes, whatever. And that will put us up higher in the algorithm. Also, if you haven't subscribed already to YouTube, please feel free to do so. We have more than 900 videos sitting over there, and they're all of this show. I'm a photojournalist, so I like to change it up. I'm a photojournalist, so I like to change it up. Like tonight, we're going to be talking about Lyme disease. I love changing it up for regular news items outside of my paranormal items. So please do. And again, all this liking and all this chatting in the chat room, and all the happy faces and all that all goes for the rest of the internet world as well, like TikTok, Twitch, all those places. It's all built on, all those platforms are built on that. Okay, welcome to the show, and I have a great guest tonight, A.W. Finnegan, and we're going to be talking about Lyme disease, and we're going to be talking about how it may have been could have been released as a biological weapon back in the day. Now, if you remember the stories, right, and for those of you that are younger, and there are a lot of you that are younger than I am, we did, after World War II, we did get scientists. Like for our space program, we were able to get some Russian scientists and some German scientists to help us out, going to the moon. And I would think that it would be like that all the way across the board, because we did get, a scientist from another country to help over at Plum Island creating these things. And it turns out the guy was a biological warfare genius as far as what he was working on for his country. Anyway, let me bring Adam in, and he can tell you a little bit more about it than I can, because obviously he's got a great book out. And I think you guys are going to learn something tonight. I just love to educate, and here we are. All right, let's bring him in. Hello.
Hello. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay.
Tell everybody about you, sir.
Well, I'm Adam Finnegan, and I wrote The Sleeper Agent, The Rise of Lyme Disease, Chronic Illness, and the Great Imitator Antigens of Biologic Warfare. After getting sick with Lyme disease, I had read Lab 257 in 2006, and my mother had Lyme disease before I did. I got bit by a tick in 2016, got a really nasty chronic disease, and when I got sick, I started looking into this Traub character, and ended up collecting all of his published research, all of his German work over at Insel Reims, which was the facility. It was like Germany's Plum Island. He was there, for the Nazis, and then the Soviet Union captured that facility and kind of like flipped him to the Soviet intelligence, and then sent him over here as a Russian double agent. And I had contacted somebody named John Loftus. John Loftus was the first person to reveal the biological warfare connection to Lyme disease in 1982. And he was saying that it was being spread by ticks before they even acknowledged that it was being spread by a tick. And then the next year after that, they did confirm it, but they said these Plum Island tests never took place. And I was able to. I actually published an article today on my website that kind of dispels some of the attempts to say that it's been around for thousands of years old, like the Borrelia burgdorferi, when in fact none of these attempts were based on anything solid. Even the scientists were using unreliable methods to make their case, and it was like this fact checker had like cited a bunch of articles saying it was like thousands of years old, and I was able to show very clearly how that was a lie. But so I basically I worked on this book for like 6 years, and originally it was over 1,000 pages, but I had to really cut it down and get the crucial information and make it a good book. And so I did that, and my publisher is Trine Day Publishers, and I work for Trine Day as well. And so that's kind of like my background a little bit. And I think I might have gotten Lyme disease from my mother, like from birth. I'm not sure though, but I know I got bit in 2016, got really sick. But at the same time, it was like I got a chronic disease, full spectrum chronic disease. But it was like I was thinking back on my life, and I was like, all of those symptoms that I experienced over the years, like sporadically, kind of like all came online at once, and it was like, wow, this makes a lot more sense. Maybe I've been sick my whole life. Yeah, and so I don't know what specifically you want to get into, but we can talk about whatever you'd like about the book and whatever else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about this. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the show, we did take a bunch of a good handful of scientists and brought them over here to do work for us, especially with the space program. So
Hmm.
I see no reason why they wouldn't have pulled somebody over here to work at Plum Island to start creating these weapons. Because if everybody else has the weapons, we're sure as heck gonna have them too.
Hmm. Yeah, and what he did was Erich Traub came over here, and what he did was show them how to have a biological warfare program, but hide it under benign research. Right? Excuse me. So you hide it under animal disease, and one thing that he did was taking animal diseases and adapting them to human. So turning animal diseases into human diseases. Um, and before the days of the genetic engineering technology, they used animal passages. So you run it through an animal, and certain animals mutated it or gave it properties, certain specific properties, like, for example, mouse passages made it more neurotropic, which means it takes to the brain and central nervous system. And so, and actually, even with genetic engineering technology, they still use that older method because it doesn't leave footprints of tampering. Because you're using animals, right? And
Right, right.
even though they're in a lab, so it kind of makes the whole idea. Well, we think it came from nature because it came from animals. Well, if those animals are in a lab, and that was Erich Traub's fine art, was using animal passages. So he kind of showed them how to hide the biological warfare program, and the reason why it was so important to hide was because, for one, they're banned by international treaties, right? And Germany learned a hard lesson from using biological and chemical weapons in World War I, and they were sanctioned by the League of Nations and had to pay reparations, and they just finished paying reparations for World War I in like 2012 or something like that. So it took them 92 years to pay off that debt. And it crippled their economy. It crippled Germany. And that was actually a big reason for the rise of the Third Reich, was they felt like they were losing control of Germany, and they kind of rose up, and they actually went to the Soviet Union to train, because the Versailles Treaty, what it said, not only did they have reparations, they couldn't have an army, they couldn't have a military, and so they just kind of gave them the finger and went to the Soviet Union to like circumvent the treaty, and they actually they built up their army in the Soviet Union, and they stopped like Hitler, he cut that off in like 1933, and then they would become bitter enemies. But the Soviet Union was actually a big part of giving them their start. So that's pretty interesting.
It is.
Um,
When you started to look back through his history, was it really hard to
yeah,
find information on him?
yeah, it was, and I actually I started with some of his papers and just started finding citations, and then a lot of his science papers were in German, and they were only available in the German universities. And so I went through this distributor, and this distributor, like I had to pay for these articles, and so I did that, and it took me a really long time, and I had to so I basically turn all of the pages into text, like from a picture to text. You use like OCR technology or whatever. It turns the images into text, and then I would, because of the sheer volume of what I had, I'd just run it through Translator, and then I kind of go through it and fix whatever I could find that was wrong. And I had to also, and I learned about the basis of chronic disease prior to this. It was something called immune tolerance, and it was a big part of Erich Traub's life work, and it was the basis of his stealth biological weapons that incapacitated instead of killing. Because a lot of people are like, why would anybody make a biological weapon that doesn't kill right away, you know?
Right.
And it's like it's called, what it is called a strategic weapon, right? And a strategic weapon, it's aiming to tire and exhaust and overwhelm the enemy over a long period of time, and it's actually doing a really good job. So you overwhelm the public health system with these very complicated diseases that they don't know how to treat, they don't know how to diagnose, and that was a big part of developing biological weapons, was to make agents that confuse the diagnosis. So he would combine different diseases all rolled into one, and then it would completely, because the medical, they like to put things into specific boxes, right? Right. For diagnosis, and this just completely obliterates that. And so that was a big concept in biological warfare, was confusing diagnosis. And so these stealth pathogens would just filter through the population, and over time they would just keep getting rolling and have like a snowball effect. And that's basically like some of the background behind biological warfare agents, and the kind of the context of like Nazi Germany. Mm-hmm. And Erich Traub, so yeah, I collected all of his published work, and I had to, so after I had learned immune tolerance, I had to go through all of his science papers and stuff, and just like I'd have to interpret all of that. Mm-hmm. So it was very like painstaking work. And this is like the first book that offers a very in-depth history of Erich Traub, but also that biological warfare association with Lyme disease. And I'm able to show when he got the spirochetes, right? And I'm able to show like kind of like the developments it took, because it was over in Germany first, mm-hmm. you know, and then Plum Island. It wasn't until later that he got Plum Island involved. Like when he came over, so it was already spreading in Germany, and when he came over, he was back and forth between Plum Island and Colombia, like down in Central America. And it was funny because he would go down there as the birds were getting ready to fly south, and then as the birds were getting ready to fly north, he'd come back up. So it was like in parallel to the bird patterns. And what John Loftus had told me was, and what his sources had told him, was that it was released on ticks, like on shorebirds and stuff. And the birds actually play a big role in this biological warfare story. So there's that. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of like making like an eco weapon, where you'd have something that's like all, you know, taking advantage of the environment and the animals in it. Mm-hmm. And it seems like he basically adapted these diseases to so many different animals, and they would just all be promoting it. Mm-hmm. And we know that the birds have Lyme disease, that they spread it, and we know that like all sorts of other animals spread it. Mm-hmm. Like even the cattle and such. And we know that Erich Traub was at Plum Island because I have FBI documents that confirm this. And it says, and it's funny because there was this 2004 New York Times article with the Agricultural Research Service spokeswoman. They're like a subdivision of the USDA, saying that she knows no association that Erich Traub had to Plum Island. But these documents show that, yeah, he was there the entire time. He was actually, and he put for his reason for being there was the public law that was responsible for creating Plum Island. So they actually made a reference to him in that hearing. So they were planning on having him there the entire time. Like from the very beginning, they wanted him there. And basically what I showed too is that all the way up to 1951, the main tick that's responsible for spreading Lyme disease and all the other nasty tick-borne diseases, it wasn't a known transmitter of any known human disease all the way up to 1951. They were still saying that. And then what I have is that Polly Murray is like one of the first like well-known Lyme disease cases, and she wrote a book called The Widening Circle about her, her nightmare journey trying to get diagnosed for being sick. And she lists the start of her illness as August in 1955. So a lot of people think that Lyme disease started in 1975, but that's not true. It's just the year that they decided to shine all this light on it and actually acknowledge that it was a disease. And I have also like papers, by Alan Steer, one of the main Lyme disease CDC guys, where he published showing that it was in Cape Cod as far back as 1961. So 1975 is definitely not the start of it, and it was spreading since even though he probably further weaponized it here, it may have been here like even as far back as like 1945. From the strains that. So Donald McLean was a British intelligence guy who's very high up, and he was involved in a lot of like the weapons developed, or like basically he got a lot of the Nazis over here, and he ended up defecting to Russia as a Soviet double agent in 1951. But he was also kind of directing Plum Island tests before Traub got over here. Not doing any of the experiments himself, but just kind of facilitating that they would be testing things there. And so it's possible that the Lyme disease spirochete was here before Traub got back here. But they were still his weapons. And I show that he also learned all about the tick-borne diseases. So in his background, people are like, oh, he just specializes in foot and mouth disease and stuff. And it's so much more than that. But the tick-borne disease research is very hard to find, and I actually found it in one of his mentors' papers. And it was while Erich Traub was underneath him, like working as his associate professor. And in that paper, it was a paper about animal rickettsiosis. So rickettsia is like a bacteria, and it's one of the tick-borne diseases. But it was talking in that paper about a complicated disease that could be seen in a dog with a mix of infections, and he names Bartonella, he names Babesia, he names rickettsia, and ehrlichiosis, which is a tick-borne disease. All of those actually are the co-infections that you find now. And they talked about how spirochetes, the Borrelia spirochetes, could occasionally could occasionally infect hard-bodied ticks, although it was rare. So all the way up until like 1983, Willy Bergdorfer was saying, "Oh, you know, they're only in soft-bodied ticks, which aren't really a nuisance to humans." And what this guy was showing is in 1939 was, yeah, they could occasionally, and that gave Erich Traub the idea that all he had to do was find a tick that was a real nuisance to humans. And because the black-legged tick was not a known transmitter of disease back then, they were like, oh, well, we can use that tick for all of these tests, right? And they were supposed to, and they were supposed to be harmless tracer bacteria that were infecting them. And apparently he told them that it, causes a bullseye rash, but it was completely harmless. And so they started doing these tests. All the while, it was this bioterror attack for Joseph Stalin and the communists. And what I also have is a 1953 USDA poultry conference where it's about biological warfare against the poultry industry, and they name in that hearing one of the agents that they were concerned about was avian spirochetosis, so the bird Lyme disease, basically. And that was the spirochete that Erich Traub had in his possession in 1939 when he was learning also about those tick-borne diseases. And later, I was able to show in the book that it's actually the closest relative to Borrelia burgdorferi. It was like the parent strain that gave rise to the three strains that are responsible for Lyme disease. And so also what I have is in 1958, there's a newspaper article that names the black-legged tick as a serious transmitter of disease. So from 1951, where it's not a known transmitter of any human disease, all of a sudden, and so you've got that time frame basically, and I mean, I just worked really hard, and I go over in like the early chapters, all about like the early days of biological warfare, and you'll find this interesting is that George Washington was the first one to talk about biological warfare against the USA, and I include a quote in this about George Washington talking about the British using smallpox as a biological weapon.
Wow.
Which is really interesting. Yeah, and this is 1775. Yeah. And against the Native Americans. And they were also, Britain was also doing the same thing to Australia. And I go over like in the early chapters, right? And then I start getting into, there's this old German bioterrorism campaign against America in 1914 to 15, where they were going around infecting all the horses with bacteria. And what is interesting, and it kind of shines light on the whole idea of animal disease and human disease not being so separate, was that so they were going around infecting these horses, and they were military and medical horses, and they weren't just made for, the horses weren't just for pulling carts. So they were also used to produce serums and vaccines. So indirectly, it was like going at humans. And there's this strange interplay between viruses and bacteria in the beginning, and I show that it seems like this was some of the early activity that gave rise to this so-called Spanish influenza. And what John Loftus says about that is that the Russians thought that the British had actually created it. So this is like all real early stuff that almost, many people would find hard to believe, but my book is backed up by extensive evidence. And so I've got, citation, over 1,000 citations in this. And I only use like official sources of information, like medical journals, government documents, and things of that nature. So I was able to, I go over that, right? And then I start getting into because the Russians thought that it was a British biological weapon, they decided to go all out with this biological warfare stuff. They're like, this is going to be the weapon to fight future wars. And they didn't have a lot of money. Like they understood that the West was technologically superior to them. So they were like, let's just do biological warfare because you can have it in these homegrown labs and things like that. And so they went really deep into that. And I covered that like in the next two chapters so all the way up to chapter 4. And then I go over like this Day X that they talk about, which was a large-scale war of bioterrorism against the West by Joseph Stalin. And they also were like infiltrating the West. Okay, so and they would infiltrate the biological sciences, like they'd get and the public health system. So they'd get people into the public health system, they get people into like the science community, and they were doing that for a long time. And then in chapter 5, I start going into Erich Traub's life because he's basically at the center of the story. And it's about a lot more than just Lyme disease, but I kind of make that the center. And I go through his entire life, and he also worked with those mosquito-borne diseases, which gave rise to things like West Nile virus. And I'm able to just kind of tell you Erich Traub's entire life and all of his work. And it's interesting because, there's been a lot of mystery behind him for so many years.
There has.
Yeah, like, because Lab 257 only kind of goes into him a little bit, and it leaves you kind of wanting more. You're like, I want to know more about this, And so I was kind of like, and I remember John Loftus saying that years from now, historians are going to have a really hard time piecing this together, and it'll be like putting leaves back on a tree in the right order. And he's like, it'll probably happen long after I'm gone. And I remember being like, I don't want to find it while he's still alive, right? For some reason, that was like one of my goals. Because I made like this timeline a while back and I sent it to him, and he thought it was really amazing. And then we started like talking, and he started to like give me hints what to look into. And I got involved with him and these two other girls who were working on like a screenplay about it. And they helped me get a lot of the documents, because it was costly. And so I basically was like driven to kind of get the story. And it was like, it was such a passion. It was like, I didn't even have a choice. It was just like something moving through me, just like driven to find the story out. And so I did that, basically. I mean, there were sometimes I'd work like 18 hours a day, and, I had a few relationships sour because of the attention that I was putting on the book, So it was a lot of work. And then, like, in the later chapters, So I also go over, there was a large program in the American Biological Warfare Program called the Simulant Program, or you could think of it as simulation. So what they would do is just like take what they say was a harmless bacteria, and they'd spray it all over the place in open air, overpopulated areas too. And they would see, how it spreads out. And so they started doing that. And what I also show is that the bacteria that they use, it was called Serratia marcescens. I have Erich Traub weaponizing that in World War II. So when he came over here advising the Americans, and he's the one who put them up to this whole simulant test, because in 1933, German intelligence, they went to the subways of Paris and London and did this secretly. I think using like light bulbs, or actually something that was some kind of device that they could spray this bacteria in the in the subways and such, or wherever it was. I don't know where exactly, but they did these tests secretly in 1933, German intelligence. So they were also doing it in World War II. And when we brought Erich Traub over here, he was like at the top of the biological warfare program. It wasn't like, so even though he was a veterinarian and he was at Plum Island, he was like at the top of the program.
Sure.
And these animal disease facilities were like the most important facilities for a biological warfare program because of that zoonosis thing. The animals are the source of the diseases, and that's where they'd hide it all. So he was putting them up to this whole simulant program. And I was able to show that they were even using the smallpox vaccine as a standard simulant back in like the 1950s, which, then I started to think, is this some kind of also like an aerogenic vaccine program? And it looks like it may have been. So I go over all of that, and then I start showing all of these conferences from the USDA where they're meeting, talking about biological warfare attacks. So, like, for example, the one in 1953 that I told you about, the poultry conference, where they mentioned spirochetosis for the only time on record. You don't hear about it after that, and it's probably because it was classified. Mm-hmm. And what's suspicious is Plum Island should have been all over Lyme disease research because their specialty was foreign animal diseases. Mm-hmm. And they all know, like, they've always known that it's been very, that its main source was animals. So they should have been researching this the entire time. By definition of what they do. And the fact that you hear absolutely nothing about it. But I am able to also show that Plum Island was also, they did publish some research on spirochetes, and there's a spirochete called Leptospira, which is a nasty one that can be transmitted in water. And they were also publishing about those different rickettsia. But in Lab 257, Michael Christopher Carroll talks to the guy, the Jerry Callis, who was like the director of Plum Island, and he admitted that back then in the 50s, they did have a tick program, like in the early 50s, right? So Erich Traub was there the whole time. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that means, okay, he was working with ticks. That shows that he was working with ticks. And he had a lab technician named Ann Berger who was approved to come over here. And in her Navy file, it says that they would be working on over 40 strains of viruses in rickettsia.
Wow.
So there's the tick-borne disease research, because she was working directly for him. She was coming over here to be his assistant. So that in that document, that's where it says that he's working with tick-borne diseases. So we have that. And then after that, I start going into the whole public health response from like 1975, when they decided to shine all the light on it and finally admit that this is a disease. And I talk about the Dearborn Conference and so the Dearborn Conference was a bunch of conferences where they were trying to come up with a standard test that they could use to diagnose Lyme disease. But the test actually misses most of the cases. And there's a nonprofit organization that has taken them on, called Truth Cures, and they show that these tests are fraudulent. And it has a lot to do with that whole immune tolerance phenomenon that Erich Traub discovered. And so immune tolerance, you can think of it like the immune system is so overwhelmed that it's tolerating harmful pathogens it should otherwise be keeping out of the body. That's why they called it immune tolerance, is the immune system. So you don't have all that inflammation that you'd see with a heavy immune response. It kind of flips on its head the paradigm that a lot of people have of immunology. But some of these immunosuppressive diseases, actually you have no visible symptoms because your immune system's kind of like knocked offline. And so along with that, you don't make enough antibodies to test positive. So they're going off antibodies. Right, for the test. And so that's why you have so many sick people, but almost not, like, so few of them can actually get diagnosed. And then you have, this also covers the realm of chronic fatigue syndrome. It covers like myalgic encephalomyelitis and fibromyalgia. So all of those chronic diseases that are really controversial. Well, this is why, because of all of this stuff, from Erich Traub's earlier work.
Right.
And so it's been like and they actually gave two guys the Nobel Prize for immune tolerance, about organ transplant recipients, because the same condition happens in organ transplant. Work together. They weren't even nominated together by anybody, and they were given the Nobel Prize in error. And I point out that this was probably not a mistake, not a coincidence. They were trying to bury Erich Traub's life work because obviously he used it as a weapon against us. And so I cover like all of that. I go through the whole story, and I go through these attempts by these later scientists who try to, they're writing articles like, no, Lyme disease is not a biological weapon, despite what conspiracy theorists say. And and then there's all these like fact-checking articles about Lyme disease couldn't have been a biological weapon, and it was around for thousands of years, and I dispel all of that. And I also get into how they had these like socio-political offensives and public relations fronts that they would run. And I've got some of these public health officials quoted talking about writing articles for things like Quack Watch, writing articles for the Washington Post, things like that. So like they were very involved in stuff like that. And I'm able to show that with quotes. And it's interesting because one of the guys goes, The battle cannot be won on a scientific front. We need to mount a socio-political offensive, but we are outnumbered and outgunned. We need reinforcements from outside our field. Because a lot of people are seeing through the lies,
Right.
and they're like, this is so many sick people. They're angry. They go to the public, and that's what happened to me. I went to the doctors thinking, okay, whatever's wrong with me, they'll figure it out, and I can get on with my life.
Mm-hmm.
But that didn't happen. I never recovered, and then I'm doing a lot better now. But like back then, it's like he's like, I think you have viral labyrinthitis, and you'll be better in a few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't happen. I got sicker and sicker, and the more I went to them, the less they would do for me, and they couldn't find anything wrong with me, so they just send me around to different specialists. None of them had any answers, and then if you keep trying to go get help, they basically tell you that you're not sick and you're imagining your disease. They call it somatoform, psychosomatic. And what I can show in this book is that actually, no, that whole psychosomatic thing is complete nonsense. Mm-hmm. And this is why. Because this whole immune tolerance phenomenon that Erich Traub had been studying and using for his weapons, it shows that, and I actually quote Erich Traub talking about how the mice would have, so he studied this virus called lymphocytic choriomeningitis virus, or LCM virus, and that was actually the virus that he learned immune tolerance with. Like in 1936, he basically, what he did was he injected a mouse's brain with this foreign antigen, and it caused like a septic shock, and it reactivated a latent virus. And then he basically started an epidemic in the mouse colony after doing that. So he started an epidemic from scratch.
Wow.
Which is interesting. And it has the whole idea of virus reactivation, so latency and reactivation. And that was also a big part, because in Lyme disease, when you get Lyme disease, usually what happens is these spirochetes shed these proteins into your bloodstream, very toxic, and it causes all of those latent viruses like Epstein-Barr virus, even herpes simplex, which a lot of people have in latent, form, is it's seriously neurotropic when it's reactivated. So it goes for your brain, and the same with EBV, Epstein-Barr virus, and so this is another big part of like this whole chronic fatigue syndrome. A lot of that is like viral. The reactivated viruses. Mm-hmm. So it's also a big part of Lyme disease too. So the Lyme disease almost becomes like a secondary infection, and you get all these viruses that come online. And I have Erich Traub talking about how the mice can have this nasty infection, but yet they look totally normal, and they didn't make antibodies. Mm-hmm. And that kind of flips the entire paradigm of immunology on its head, and so I'm able to show for all of those sick people out there that can't get diagnosed, I'm able to show that this is why you can't get diagnosed,
right.
So it really it really opens up this can of worms that they've been trying to keep hidden for a long time. And a lot of times they will send people to psychiatric places for trying to get help for their disease, and they're telling you you're not sick, but you keep trying to get help. So what they do is they send you to a psychiatric place, and then they put you on all the antidepressants and stuff, and none of that helps it. So that's kind of like, and then in the last chapter I go over I go over like the early polio vaccines and such. And so I talk about another character in this story named MP Chumakov. He was a Soviet bioweaponeer for Stalin. What this guy did in 1937 was he and a bunch of people, he and a bunch of people started testing Stalin's started testing bioweapons on the Muslim and Mongolian populations in Siberia. And this guy, MP Chumakov, was like at the center of that. And he was like one of the most important bioweaponeers in the Soviet Union. And so he's testing, and this is where these hemorrhagic fevers started, like those Ebola-like viruses.
Right.
They actually started in the Russian territories, and John Loftus says that these, from what his sources have told him, was saying that these were bioengineered during Stalin's bioweapons program. And what I have here is that, so he also went to that German facility, Insel Reims, when the Russians had captured it, and he met with Erich Traub to talk about that LCM virus. And then after that, MP Chumakov teams up with he works with Albert Sabin to make the oral polio vaccine that would be given to millions of Americans. Okay, and he also apparently worked with Jonas Salk, the one who made the inactivated polio vaccine, and both of those being contaminated with SV40. It's really eye-opening, because like, why did we allow our scientists to team up with a hardcore Stalinist bioweaponeer?
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like, it's the craziest thing ever. And I talk about that story, and I am also able to go into the HIV thing, and contrary to what a lot of people think, that it was from monkeys, I actually think that it was from horses. There's a virus called equine infectious anemia virus. It's a lentivirus and a retrovirus, just like HIV. It goes for the T cells, just like HIV. And what they were doing was adapting it to different animals, and they were adapting it to sheep. And there's always been this talk about how HIV is related to the sheep Visna virus,
right?
The Visna virus of sheep, right? And then, and then what? So when they were making those monkey kidney cultures to grow the polio vaccines in, what people didn't realize is that they were mixing that with horse serum. They were mixing horse serum with that to make the final product, and that's where I'm thinking that the HIV thing came from, and that's why it also had properties of simian viruses, because the way these kind of viruses work is that they kind of absorb material from other things that they encounter in the environment that they're in. So if they're like picking up material from simian or monkey viruses too, well, then it's a very unique virus, because then it's got sheep material from sheep. It's got material from monkeys, right? And there was a French researcher, Luc Monnier, and he published a paper called "A New Type of Retrovirus Isolated from Patients Presenting with Lymphadenopathy and Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, Structural and Antigenic Relatedness with Equine Infectious Anemia Virus." And in that paper, he was saying that it's so closely related to this horse virus. And he was saying that they were able to, I think he was saying that they were able to infect horses with it, if my memory served me, or at least they could propagate it in horse tissue. And so I think that might be the missing link. And that's kind of like, in the end, I talk about that. And this was something that this Insel Reims, that German facility, they were working with a lot, was this equine infectious anemia virus. So it's a really interesting story from start to finish. And then also MP Chumakov was, of course, like I said, in 1937, these hemorrhagic fevers. And so I also show that Marburg virus may have come from him. Marburg virus may have come from him. And so there's also something called Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever, right? It's an Ebola-like virus, but they called it Crimean Congo. You know, the Crimea is in Russia.
Right.
It was actually called Crimean hemorrhagic fever first. Then all of a sudden, it shows up in Africa, and they had all these expeditions down in Africa at that time, and they were doing a lot of research with these hemorrhagic fevers in monkey tissues, knowing that they'd be using monkey tissues to propagate things like vaccine or viruses in vaccine. So they're like, it was very sinister. They're like going around infecting monkeys in the jungle, knowing that they'd be sourced for material. And it's just very eye-opening, the whole story. And so he was also, MP Chumakov was also involved in hybridizing, like making hybrid ticks, like crossbreeding different ticks together and producing new ticks that didn't exist naturally. And they were really involved in that, like using ticks as a weapon. It was a big thing for them. And we were always kind of like in last place when it came to biological warfare. Like we were always downplaying it, like that it wasn't feasible and things like that. And they saw how feasible it was, like in 1918, and they saw how feasible it was, like, you know, then you had the typhus epidemics. And apparently, John Loftus had told me that they had sent typhus to Russia through prisoners of war. Germany did. And so they were kind of decimated by disease, and they decided to put all their resources into a biological warfare program. So that's kind of like the summary, I would say, of my book.
You know what I find really scary about this is that, like you say, like just in the case you just talked about, of sending the prisoners over, carrying this stuff. But what's frightening is you always hear, you know, the conspiracy theories about the cloud, you know, them seeding the clouds with stuff. You know,
Yeah.
so when it rains, it falls on us. But
Yeah.
you know, according to your book, and I did read part of your book, it's scary because they've been releasing stuff secretly into the population in the U.S. and none of us, nobody knows about it. No permission given, no nothing. They're just releasing this garbage.
Yeah, and actually there's laws that allow them to test on the population. And it's called Title 50, Section 1520A, right? And so, well, first it was 1520, and it said that they could test biological agents on the population if they deemed it necessary. Then 1520A was supposedly a reversal of that, to say that you can't test biological agents on the population, right? But in the fine print, it says exceptions to this law. So you can't test on the population except, and it says any peaceful purpose that is related to a medical, therapeutic, pharmaceutical, agricultural, industrial, or research activity. And any purpose that is directly related to protection against toxic chemicals or biological weapons and agents, which that's always the rationale, is that we need to protect against it. So we need to test on you, But this this law allows them to do basically whatever they want. I mean, a research activity is a very vague term.
Mm-hmm.
It's a vague term that could cover anything. And we already talked about how agricultural facilities were used, to hide the programs.
Right.
So all they have to do is say it's an agricultural activity, or pharmaceutical activity. Well, pharmaceuticals, and so, yeah, I'm thinking, and then there's like all of that geoengineering stuff. I'm thinking some of this may actually be integrated into that, because there was all this talk about aerogenic vaccines, right? And it looks like that may have been going on. Well, actually it was, because they were using vaccinia virus, the smallpox vaccine. Mm-hmm. And and all of my research, I've noticed that these simulant activities never stopped. Mm-hmm. People who know about it generally think that, it just happened in the 1950s, and then, because there were deaths involved. Like, San Francisco man named Edward Nevins died because of the Serratia Markson's test they were doing in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. But then there were all these people hospitalized with very resistant infections with that bacteria when they hadn't ever noticed any infections coming from that bacteria before. And it became a big thing in the 1970s. They had a hearing about it, a congressional hearing, and there was a big uproar. And then there was a big uproar, and then, but people think these things stop. They never stop. They keep doing them. It's like it's a routine thing, I noticed. So then I'm like, because if you're going to spray bacteria all over the place, haven't you already figured out how it spreads out after doing it so many times, from the 1950s? Like, have you not figured out how it moves in the air? I mean, is it that important now? Do you just keep doing it over and over and over? And then I'm like, what? It seems to make sense to me that maybe it is one of these like aerogenic vaccine programs. Because why would you keep doing it? I mean, that would be. And so it's kind of infuriating to think that they would do that, but they've got these laws in place that allow it. And then they've got like all sorts of new laws after 2001, like the Patriot Act. Well, there was like a Patriot Act of biodefense too, kind of. And it had to do with this public health law 42, which covered public health and welfare and stuff. And all these new laws that were also produced that allowed them even more freedom, as if that one didn't give them enough. So yeah, it is very eye-opening, and it is kind of a lot to take in, I would say. Absolutely. But I don't know. I mean, I just felt driven to do it, and I had a lot of sick friends that were, being denied that they were sick, and it made me really mad, and I was mad that I was sick and they were telling me that. And so I started looking into this stuff. I had a knack for doing this research, and that's basically what I did.
Fantastic job. I want to congratulate you. Fantastic job. What's next for you?
Yeah, I mean, so I had, like 1,000 pages in that original. So I have material for, plenty of more books, and I'm thinking I might want to get into the special virus cancer program, maybe. And then, maybe I'll go deeper into the simulant program and also Morgellons disease. Okay. So I did some research on that, and what I found was that it seems that this is a biotechnology. And what they were finding these microplastics in the rainwater in the Colorado, in the Rocky Mountains. And they were showing samples of it in the article. It was a Guardian article. It said something like, it's raining plastic fibers from the sky in the Rocky Mountains. and it shows a sample of it. And then I went to there was a site called the Carnicom Institute where they were investigating this Morgellons disease, and they were like, they were a scientific organization, and they were showing that it's like some kind of biotechnology. And so I put the sample of the rainwater and a sample from that person, from a person that they're pulling it off from, and it was the same exact thing. You see these things, it's the same exact thing. So how's it getting in the rainwater?
Right.
Well, this is probably why. And I actually found DARPA documents that kind of confirm that. So
that's frightening. It's very frightening.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for coming on, and when you do write the second book, I would love to talk to you again about this stuff. It's just
awesome.
The best thing. That's why I let you just go tonight, because you're the man with all the information. I'm not, so
Yeah.
It's more beneficial to hear you speak. But I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah. Anytime.
How can people find you, sir?
So you get my website is thesleeperagent.com. That's the website for the book, and from there, all I have to do is tell you that, because from there you can go to the videos section and you find my YouTube channel and you find my my Rumble channel, and I also have an email address under the author page. So if you just go to thesleeperagent.com, that's the website.
All right, fair enough. Once again, thank you very much. Have a great rest of your evening. I appreciate it.
You too.
Okay.
Awesome.
Bye-bye, sir. Okay, bye-bye. All right. Sorry for cutting them off real quick. I have to take off. I have an appointment I have to be at. Anyway, guys, I hope I'm not going to say enjoyed this. It was a good, very informative show. This is what I like to do. I like to educate people. So this was educating, even for me. I did read half of his book. I get a lot of books in the mail, a lot from people that are going to be on the show, and usually I can get about halfway through those things, and then I have to just go with it. So that's usually what goes on. Tomorrow we're shifting gears back to the paranormal again. Stan Deo is going to be with us tomorrow. We're going to be talking about ancient giants, and we're going to be talking about UFOs and other interesting things. Stan has a lot of research he's done in all the fields, and so we're going to have a good conversation about that. Anyway, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. If you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. Equal opportunity here. We're just trying to get the word out about our little old show. All right. Okay, guys, I will see you tomorrow, and I'll give you his contact information once again, along with the book. And, it's going to be a fun day tomorrow. So here we go. Here's the end, and let's see if we got this. His website is thesleeperagent.com. And the book, of course, is The Sleeper Agent. And that can be found at Amazon, of course, plus his website. All right, again, I will see you guys tomorrow. Sorry for the delay at the beginning. We've been having internet technical difficulties, and I'm going to get into it with Xfinity here tomorrow, and it's going to be an interesting conversation with them. But I will see you tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, with Stan Deo. Have a great rest of your evening, folks.